Anyways, so look, everyone keeps asking me, oh my God, Shinra, so how do you, change the fact that your rhetoric is really bad, And, first you need to establish, for all of the people who are extremely confused what rhetoric is. Now, maybe we all define rhetoric differently, the sorts of definitions, the sorts of like, senses we have whenever we're referring to any specific phenomena, we're always going to be different. But whenever, if you want to ask me how to improve your rhetoric, or you want to ask me why is your rhetoric bad, right? Again, the sort of thing we'll be going over whenever we're talking about rhetoric in the first place here is just your ability to convey an argument in a simple, concise, fair, and succinct fashion, right? Whenever you're trying to create an argument. And the way in which you present your arguments, not only does it have to be able to make very, very extremely complex arguments with loads of substance within them, you need to be able to, squish them down in a way in which not only do you not lose any substance, right? It's like a sort of golden mean where you don't lose any substance, but at the same time, you also are able to grab the attention of the people who are listening, right? And make them actually comprehend your point. Because again, another integral part of comprehension is the amount of attention you're paying to something. If you're not paying any attention to something, of course you won't be able to comprehend it, right? So you need to actually have some sort of charisma. So the first thing you want to do is just be well read up on the topic you're talking about. Now, obviously, you will see this in regular conversations as well, that the more you are read up on the topic and the more you know about the topic, you'll be way more enthusiastic whenever you're talking about it. And the fact that you're so enthusiastic whenever you're talking about the said topic allows you to, express yourself in a way in which you aren't overly stuttering. You are actually portraying the thing that you're saying, and you're, because of the fact that you want other people to be interested in it as much as you are, right? You'll be charismatic. Whenever you're talking, you'll be excited. There's a lot for you to say, and you want to say all of it. That's the first thing. The second thing is, typically the sort of issues people run into whenever they are trying to quote unquote improve their rhetoric is they run into a pacing issue. Now, this is the sort of issue that I see loads of people like Smoothie have, loads of people like Official have. They run into a sort of pacing issue where they can't figure out whether or not they want to speak quickly or they want to speak, slowly. And I'll say this, the sort of less things that you say in a conversation and in general, the less, more concise and more adequate responses you give, the better you're going to look in terms of rhetoric. Not only due to the fact that, because of the fact that you're not saying a lot, you don't need to focus on brevity because there's not a lot to say. So typically the reason why people choose to say a lot whenever they are speaking is because they feel, and sometimes I fall victim to this as well, is because you are not able to, flesh out the sort of argument you want to make in as little words as possible. But by reducing the amounts of words that you say and also increasing the amount of time that it takes you to say them, it allows you to think of more things to say as you're saying them. And as you're thinking of more things, it allows you to, have more substance in the responses you're giving. And because of the fact that you have more substance in the response you're giving, overall you're going to look better. So ask yourself doesn't speak too quickly, and even take Evil Destiny, take Cynthia. They don't speak too quickly or too slowly. However, you notice that the sort of responses they're given, if it isn't an opening statement, all of them are going to be very short and concise responses. And the reason being is because, rambling is one of the things which you will always be getting called out on, right? Because nobody really wants to hear somebody else ramble. Other people may consider what you're saying rambling because, they don't have the attention span to keep up with what you're saying. But sometimes you just don't want to actually fall into the problem of where you're actually rambling. And, actually rambling is like, fine, it's a skill that you can work on really easily. But again, typically cutting out all of the ramble and being very succinct in the sort of fashion in which you're speaking, it allows you to display the point, to display the sort of argument that you're making much better than you would have on the act before. You notice people like Smoothie being like, right? And you won't be able to decipher the sort of substance that you will, your opponent will. So typically they fall into this sort of trap where, because they also are speaking too fast for their brain to register, Smoothie being one of the main examples, right? But obviously there are other examples that exist that I just can't name, but Smoothie is the main one, right? Where obviously they're just speaking too fast for their brain to account for. Then when they are asked to do something very simple like, hey, can you write out the sort of argument you're making? They sort of flounder and they refuse to flat out because they sort of can't remember the things that they're saying. They can't remember the substance, right? And if you do that, you're obviously going to look way less convincing to the audience. Not only because of the fact that, and this is the most important bit, that you just shows to the audience that you're lacking in terms of substance, in which it's so much so that you can't even remember the sort of words that you're saying in the conversation as well. But also the fact that you aren't able to portray your point as well if the audience is unable to even understand the point you're making. So again, rhetoric is this sort of thing where you will look more and like, and I say rhetoric, I typically index it to a crowd of competent people because the amount of substance that you have within your arguments will benefit you more depending on if the crowd is full of people who know about the topic compared to a crowd of people who don't know a lot about the topic. So if you don't know a lot about the topic, you have like, or the crowd that doesn't at least, they are very prone to just be like, hey, this guy is he's swearing more, he's being more aggressive, right? And therefore we'll conclude that he's winning. But of course, that isn't how the community is now. To pander to people who you assume they don't know what they're talking about, it's going to look really bad on you. Because now, most of the community, even if they don't know exactly what they're talking about, they still have some vague idea in which they're able to point out the trivially stupid stuff that people are saying. So typically you want to know a lot about the topic. Additionally, you need to find your own pace. So I know that fiction debaters and people like low tiers who just start like debating philosophy, they have this tendency of filling in every single other word that they say with a swear word. So take Senju for example, right? Senju be like haha and shit and shit and shit. Now you may say, oh well, that was just how it was. No, because you can get rid of speech patterns really easily. Well, not really easily, but you need to like actively focus on getting rid of them. So simply just saying that's how you were brought up, that doesn't really help you. Because think for example, somebody's going to be a grown man soon, right? Senju's going to be a grown man in future, and imagine he goes to an interview and he's like, oh yeah, so I have a PhD and shit. And it's like nobody's going to take him seriously. So again, you need to cut down on the filler words as much as possible so that you are able to portray your argument as clear and succinct as possible. Again, swearing is the sort of thing which it isn't actually appealing. So in fact, for you to actually picture how to be more convincing, think of like the first thing like to do, and this is another thing that I want to touch on, which is a bit separate from the video topic that I was talking about before, but it's like how to improve. If you don't have at least a vague idea of your plan in debates in the future, not just who you're going to debate, right? Everyone can think of a few names they are going to debate. Now people will always say, there's this guy who is X tier, amount of tiers better than me. I'm going to debate him and beat him and prove that I'm going better. But they don't know particularly what they have to get better at. Now, they'll typically, what they'll do is they'll say rhetoric, knowledge, and argumentation, but there's no specific part of rhetoric that they think they need to improve. There's no specific part of their arguments that they know that they need to change up for them to, separate themselves from the other tier of people. Now, again, another way to increase your rhetoric is just surround yourself with different people. If you surround yourself with the same people, you're going to pick up some of their speech patterns. So, for example, whenever you speak to Frosty and his group a lot, you notice that they always say anyways, right? If the person who they're talking to is just saying something really stupid. Now, you notice again from me, I've also picked up that speech pattern a little bit myself. Right. So speech patterns are the sort of things where you learn them based off of the people who you're hanging around. So if you're hanging around people who are constantly swearing, who are unable to actually portray a point properly to save their lives, right? Again, you'll notice that you're also sort of picking up the same sort of habits as them. You're picking up their speech patterns, right? And, doing that sort of thing is the perfect way not to improve your rhetoric, right? Because the only time you'll be convincing is whenever you're stuck within that specific friend group. And if you're stuck within that specific friend group, it's like they'll basically just be hearing carbon copies of themselves talking. And of course, they think that they're convinced by themselves. But obviously, when it comes to other people, right? People who are outside of your own little bubble, it's like you won't be as convincing. You aren't able to adapt to a situation, if you get what I mean. The third thing about rhetoric that most people need to improve, and I'll explain it a bit to you how, right, is you need to have the ability to know when to determine when to be aggressive and when to mainly just lock in and focus on the substance, because your ability to focus on the substance in and of itself is a type of rhetoric, seeing as most competent people at least are convinced by the quality of your argument rather than some arbitrary who can yell the loudest. Because if it was who can yell the loudest, then packing debaters or packing like people who like focus their entire lives to like getting as loud mics as possible, they would be the best rhetoricians. But typically competent and actually intelligent people, they care more about the thing you're saying. How did that happen? The thing you're saying rather than how you're saying it. So as long as your portrayal of your argument isn't really bad, so much so that you're unable to actually speak properly. So I've noticed that this happens to Moxie sometimes, right? Now you may not know who Moxie is, I don't blame you, but Moxie, you can say, is not bad, he's not good either, but it's just like right in the middle sort of ground, right? And Moxie, even though her arguments aren't bad, he gets really nervous while saying it, so starts stuttering so much that the argument just doesn't even come out at all. So you need to find a sort of golden mean in between those two, where you aren't too much focused on oh my god, haha, let me make my opponent seem like an inferior man to me. Instead, what you're focusing on is mostly like 80% or 60% argument, 60% substance, and then 40% of appealing to the crowd, doing theatrics. That's maybe fine, right? But as long as that 60% is good enough, in which people don't think you're just a rhetoric merchant, then you're doing something well. Now, again, the sort of reason I see is like people seem to have an issue with this is the last thing I want to touch on before I end of this video. People seem to have a sort of issue with me making debate videos, right? But the issue is the sort of people who have an issue with that are averaging 16k messages in a server that's been out for a week, or they're text debaters where they sit there and they just like give their thumbs abs by having 12 billion like day long text debates with other people, yet immediately you decide to use your voice in the engagement, they just say, haha, look at this loser, he's using his voice. It's like, look, you're on Discord, okay? So if you're on Discord, then really, like everyone's really doing something nerdy. So calling somebody else a nerd on Discord is kind of like ironic. But the other thing is, I don't know why, then this is a stigma that I always wanted people to get rid of. It's like, don't make people ashamed to want to be good at a hobby, because at the end of the day, Discord debating in general is a hobby. Obviously, people who have at least some pride, some respect for themselves, they want to be good at their hobby. They want to be, people who have ambition, who want to be the best at their hobby, better than anyone else, right? It's something they do on the side. It isn't something that they, are doing on a day-to-day basis. Maybe some people, who knows? Everyone likes their hobbies differently, right? But like some people want to actually be great at their hobbies, right? So again, it's like shaming people for wanting to be great at the hobbies that they're doing is something that will make them less motivated to want to be great at it. And there's also another sort of reason as to why the community sort of is dying down, because it's like really deeper. You're like, why are you making people like you've invested hours of your lives onto the app, right? And then not only have you invested hours of your lives onto the app, but also you're telling me that the thing that you sit on the app doing for hours, you don't even want to be intelligent and know what you're talking about when you say it. You just want to speak to speak. And it's like, that's the sort of thing where even if I can't give you an in-depth explanation as to why that's embarrassing, I think you know why that's embarrassing, right? But that's it from me. If you like the video, please remember to like and subscribe. This is Rhetoric, and I'm out.